Welcome to Wood Stuff with Hutch. It's been a while since I posted a video, but I'm back at it now. So today I'm going to be talking about repurposing some old furniture or trying to get creative with items you may have laying around or things you might find online like on Marketplace or Craigslist. So today we're going to be looking at converting bed headboards into mirrors. And this is a job for an interior designer. And they came to me, they had the headboards, and they're like, we got this big wall space. We're thinking maybe we'd like a pair of matching mirrors. Can we use these and make something out of them? And I said, sure. So this is part of one of the headboards. And unfortunately, I did not get video footage of me disassembling them, and I didn't get any footage of the original headboards. But you can imagine what they looked like. Once we get through the video, you'll kind of see what they used to be. But it was a matter of starting by disassembling them. And in this case, I used spreader clamps and pushed them apart, and with a little bit of tapping of a dead blow hammer, I was able to pop the joints free and get all the parts separated. So here's one of the legs. This needs to be cut down in order for it to set flat against the wall by the time we get everything assembled. I made this jig. This is essentially just a sled. Instead of a crosscut sled, this is a ripping sled. And you can see I've set up fences in order to hold the workpiece. And so I just push this leg against the fence in both directions. And in order to secure it, I take these cleats and screw them against the piece in order to make sure it doesn't move, slip, or slide while running it through the table saw. Now I'm ready to run the workpiece through the table saw. Everything's secure. And I go ahead and start the cut first by going a little bit wider than my final dimension. And I'm just going to sneak up on the final dimension. It was a little bit hard to see and measure where exactly the cut was going to end up on this round turned portion. So I went ahead and did the test cut. Turned off the table saw, waited for the blade to stop, then removed the sled, and obviously bumped the fence over. And now I'm ready to go ahead and make the final cut. And this will go all the way the entire length of the piece, but the blade does not go through the entire workpiece as far as the height goes. So it actually has a little strip of wood that still holds the offcut onto the remaining piece, the piece that will become part of the mirror. In order to free the offall from what is going to become part of the frame, I just take it to the bandsaw here. I'm also making sure that when doing this, I go nice and easy, slow and steady, since I'm working with a round piece. And the amount I'm cutting through is only about a 1/2 inch material, and so it's not particularly dangerous. Also, when making this cut, I want to make sure that the bandsaw blade stays clear of the final workpiece. So I'm making sure in this case the blade is to the right hand side of the kerf so that it doesn't create any ridges on the final surface. As you can see here, when coming off the bandsaw, there is a little nub of wood, a strip of wood along that right hand side. In order to remove that, all I'm going to do is grab my hand plane. In this case, taking full length cuts is not particularly easy for me. I'm a little short, and taking a full length cut on the entire workpiece is not particularly easy. And here I'm just going to work it a section at a time, starting at the tip here because it seemed to be pretty easy going there, and then work my way back to the bottom of the piece. Once I get it all smoothed down, I'm not too concerned with it being terribly perfect, seeing as how this is the back and it'll be against the wall. So if the hand plating creates a little bit of a track mark, which means the edge of the blade digs in a little bit, it's not the end of the world. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and just sand off the finish on the inside face of this square portion. This is where the stretcher, the lower stretcher of the headboard, used to be glued. And there's obviously those dowel holes there, plus the finish on there, and some glue. So I decided I'm just going to sand it all away and get a stain match and refinish it later on in the process. So we have a problem with these dowel holes from the stretcher. Somehow they're going to have to be filled because they will be visible from the front once we get done assembling the project. Here I've just chosen a 1/2-inch drill bit, and in this case a tapered chisel bit, a chisel tip drill bit, in order to be able to pretty much self-center in the existing holes. And I chose a 1/2-inch because I have 1/2-inch plug cutters, which you'll see in just a minute. And here's a view of that plug cutter I just mentioned. Here I grabbed a leftover piece from a previous project. This happens to be maple, which is, I think, what those posts are made of. Now, in order to pop these plugs free, I just grabbed a very small, narrow-tipped flathead screwdriver. I chose this particular tool because it can reach down into that kerf, you might say, and reach down to the bottom of the plug. That way the tip of the screwdriver doesn't damage the side of the plug and create a gap at the surface where it will be visible. It's time to glue in the plugs. So I go ahead and put glue in the hole as well as the plug. And I also take the time to kind of look at grain direction, make sure that the grain is going with the workpiece. When tapping them in with a hammer, I want to make sure that I leave them proud of the surface. For the plugs that are just proud of the surface, I just grab a block plane to bring them flush. For the plugs that are a lot higher off the surface, I go ahead and grab my trim saw and just get them close, and then come back with either a sander or the block plane to flush them up. A little finish sanding, and we're ready for the next step. Now this part is for the lower stretcher. It needs to be remade and narrower than the original one. So I'm just milling up a flat face so that I can move on to planing. After rough milling, I set them aside to acclimate to the shop, and later I'll mill them down to the final dimensions. In order to attach the lower stretcher to the vertical members, I've decided to use biscuits, and here you can just see the layout lines that I've done. And once that's all taken care of, I can go ahead and cut the slot for the biscuits and test fit after that. Just like the legs of the headboard that needed to have the dowel holes drilled out, here's where the original turned spindles used to be attached, and I'm using the same idea where I take a 1/2-inch drill to bore them out. And not all of the spindles popped out of the original headboard when trying to disassemble it. So here you can see where I've just taken a handsaw and cut off the end of the spindles, but I want to get those out of there because they're going to be end grain instead of long grain. So I just take a brad point drill bit and bore them out. And gluing in the plugs here, I do the same thing where I orient the grain direction in order to match. After determining how wide I wanted the finished mirror to be, I went to the top piece of the headboard and went ahead and laid out the length of where I needed to cross cut it. So over to the table saw and the crosscut sled, and I'm just going to cut it to length now. Of course, in this case, I've got to make sure that there's enough length for a tenon to go into the vertical pieces, so I have to leave it, about 1.5 inches longer than the final dimension. When cross-cutting this top piece to length, I ended up cutting into and cutting off some of the scrolled work that was part of the original design. And here I'm just making a new template, making sure that I just grab whatever I can find in the shop to help give me some nice, smooth, clean curves, and grab some cardboard, and that'll be what I use to determine the shape, or the new shape, that I'm trying to create. And here I go to the scroll saw to cut out that shape. And here I'm just taking a cardboard circular template in order to establish approximately a 7/8 diameter tenon on the end of this top piece. Since this is square off the table saw, now I'm going to grab my spoke shave and some rasps and carving tools in order to shape this tenon and blend it down to a circle so it'll fit in the round hole. The vertical pieces that were formerly the legs of the headboards have round holes that accept the tenon of the top piece. In those holes, though, is a lot of dried glue, and it'll prevent a good glue joint, so I just grab a carving chisel and gently scrape away down to clean wood. Now that I've cleaned out the hole in the side pieces, I can go ahead and gently trim down the tenon on the top piece in order to go to the final fit. Now you see here I'm pulling towards myself, and with a sharp chisel you can have a lot more control, and this isn't terribly dangerous, but I finally got it through my head that that probably wasn't the brightest idea, so I switched to a safer push cut. Here I'm just blending and shaping the wood with a rasp in order to create a smooth curve. While I was dry fitting the tenon, it created a compressed fiber ridge, and so I'm just going to smooth that out now. Now it's time to test fit everything in here. I've just done a dry glue up in order to make sure everything is coming together the way that I had planned. Looks pretty good. After staining everything to match, I had to make a template on the back side of this piece in order to cut the rabbet to accept the mirror. Now, because there's some offsets, I had to put these shims in order to support this template so it doesn't wave up and down with the weight of the router. And after securing the shims with a little bit of super glue, I went ahead and cut them off with a razor knife in order to just make sure that I didn't have them interfering with the cut of the router bit. For making this rabbet, I'm going to be using a downcut spiral bit, 1/2 inch diameter, and this will take several passes because it's going to be a rather deep rabbet in the end. And here I'm just testing the cut to make sure that it's going to go smoothly. After doing this, I realized my cut was probably a little too deep and it wasn't quite going smoothly, so I just went back and adjusted that and continued on with the process. This is the first pass, and I'm only taking about 3/16 to a 1/4 inch of material at a time, and I will be doing 2 more passes. It took me about 3 passes to get down to the final depth. Once that's completed, I take off the template and I go to my bench chisels to square up the corners. Here you can see a view of the finished piece from the back, and then I'll just flip it over and you can see the finished view from the front. Now the interior designer will just provide the mirror, and we'll have a set of matching headboard upcycled mirror frames. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.